Who's going first, guys?
We'll let the big GK take us off.
Okay.
That'll work for me. Hello, folks. How are y'all today? I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid, and I am really grateful for a sobriety date and for a new life that started July 25th, 1994. I live in a little town about 90 miles due east of Dallas, Sulphur Springs, Texas. We're going to start on chapter 2 today. And what I would like for you to do is, or what I suggest you might do, you know, we get so familiar with the big book, and we read it all the time, and we talk about it, and we all have favorite places in the book, and we pull readings out of it all the time. In doing a study like this, I like to remind myself that when Bill wrote the book, it was the primary instrument of transporting the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to an alcoholic world out there. You know, there were only 1 or 2, maybe 3 meetings, 3 towns with any meetings at all, so people were getting the news from the book. So for me, context is king. And there's an order to it. And we'll discover the order over and over again. We'll discover it when Bill finally makes a 12-step call using this order for the first time on Dr. Bob. And then he's going to talk about it more in this chapter. But he spent the majority, for me, of the doctor's opinion and his story talking about the progression of the illness of alcoholism that comes from the result of drinking. He's talking a lot about powerless over alcohol once I start to drink it. Getting the idea of that allergy of the body, just really infused in the reader's mind, that there is a reason beyond our control that once I start drinking, I lose control of the amount I take. And he's done a pretty good job on that. And for me, in this chapter, he's going to very subtly. And then throughout the next 3 chapters, he's going to be talking about the real problem for us. And that's the second part of powerlessness. I'm not just powerless over alcohol when I'm drinking it. Bill's introducing a whole new concept here at this time. I'm powerless over alcohol when I'm not drinking. And he's going to be really hammering that idea, or at least for me. And that was a new idea for me when I came in. I've been trying my whole life to not drink and was not very successful at it. Every one of us can get sober. You know, they used to say out in West Texas a lot, I'm sure they said it other places, if you want to sober up, just slap a cop. You'll get sober. We all have times of getting sick, for various reasons where we're not drinking and the body is totally detoxed of alcohol, so there's no craving left. And every time I went back to drinking, I did it on a totally sober mind. Now, for me, that's the element that he's getting ready to introduce to us. But he starts it off in this chapter. And if you've read the doctor's opinion, just try and use your imagination. You're a man or a woman, somebody sent off and got this book, you're an alcoholic, and you're reading the book, and Bill has introduced this idea that your body is different from most people's body with respect to alcohol. And most alcoholics, most of us really like to think that we're different from all other people. And Bill starts this chapter off by saying, we're a group of average Americans. We include it includes you, is what he's saying. No matter how different you think you might be when you're reading this book, this is a message that includes you. Male, female, young, old, politics, nationality, religion, it doesn't make any difference. This includes you, because the pot that holds alcoholics holds all of us. And he uses that illustration that we know of the Titanic, of the great shipwreck, and in that moment of the shipwreck, it doesn't make any difference if they were in the cheapest berths on the boat down in the very lower decks, or if they were the wealthiest people on the boat. When the shipwreck happens, they're all in the same water. And that there really is a feeling of camaraderie from just getting saved. And then he has that very important statement, I think. This in itself, having shared in a common peril, is only one element of the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we're now joined. My sponsor pointed out to me, he said, Gary, you could have talked about your drunkenness, and you could have talked about all the problems in your life. It probably did with strangers at the bar next to you. We can all tell the shipwreck stories, you know, the car wreck we had, or the arrest that we had, or the divorce we had, or the having to go to the hospital we had, or losing the job we had, or our kids are not paying any attention. You know, we can all tell those stories. We've all been wrecked. But that doesn't do anything for us except just get people that are, you know, the people in the bar and the people that I shared my story with never offered a solution. They offered commiseration and told me the same sad story. And the sadness of that story is somebody else is to blame. It's not me. But he says the tremendous fact for every one of us is we've discovered. And for me, this is what I'm to be about sharing at any meeting I go to, or I want to get to eventually with any one-on-one. We've got a common solution here. That's the powerful cement which binds us. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree, which we join in brotherly and harmonious action. And then he starts a message here that he's going to repeat at least 5 more times in the first 164 pages. This is the great news that this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. We've got a solution, and he's already told us twice, and he's going to tell us 4 more times after this. That's the purpose of this book. It's got a message which holds the solution to my problem. And Harold, before I hand it over to you, I want to get to page 18. And I don't know about you, but I had to hear this pretty strong when I got here. Bill starts off with saying, an illness of this sort. And my first sponsor burned into me, Gary, until you get sick, you're not going to get well. Until you fully accept that alcoholism is an illness, you're screwed, bud. You'll never get well as long as you think it's some kind of personal weakness, as long as you think it's a sin, as long as you think it's poor character, as long as you think it's weak willpower. You're never going to get well from the illness until you accept that it is an illness. An illness of this sort, and see, this is news if you're reading this book for the first time, if you're hearing about it for the first time, because if you're like me, you've had people, including yourself, telling you for a long, long time, what's wrong with you? Any of y'all remember that? I had strangers come up to me from time to time and tell me what was wrong with me. I had people telling me what was wrong with me since I was about 4 feet high. I hadn't even started drinking yet, and I've had people telling me what's wrong with me. We've come to believe that it's an illness. That's new information for the alcoholic. Nobody's really been telling us that. And that it involves those about us. Notice the subtle shift. It involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him. No one is angry or hurt. Not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. I want to stop right there for a moment. Again, use your imagination. You're picking the book up and you're reading it now. When you sent off the money to New York to buy the book, or if it was your husband or your wife or your mother or your grandmother that read that article in the Saturday Evening Post, or they heard something about this and they thought, my God, maybe there's something that could help Harold or help Jeanette, or just put your name there. I can guarantee you they didn't send that money off on a good day. It was probably after a long period, whether I sent the money or they sent the money. Life sucks for those people. And they were at their wits' end. They didn't know what to do. They tried everything they could to get this guy to stop drinking, or if it's me that sent off for it, I've tried everything I could to control and enjoy my drinking. And probably what's going on around me is a lot of family problems, a lot of work problems, a lot of parenting problems, a lot of marriage problems, maybe some legal problems, maybe a lot of health problems. So this illness involves those about us in a way that no other human sickness can. And he's going to mention that again later in this chapter. He's going to talk about the condition that I had to get into, and probably you had to get into, before we became willing to listen to anything. And that's moving towards that time in our life where we're going to come to believe in the hopelessness and the futility of life as we know it. And that has to do with broken relationships and broken dreams and broken promises and affecting everybody around us. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fears, resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives and blameless children, sad wives and parents. Any of you can increase the list. We hope that, now here's the book again, we hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or who may be affected. There are many. And before I give it to Harold, I want to use a secondary reading of that. For me, I'll get a lot of people. I'm working with a couple of newcomers right now who have spouses that are still drinking. And many of us in AA have family members and loved ones who are still drinking. And we might need to go back and read that paragraph again. And we might need to read what I'm going to turn over here to Harold in a moment about how we work with other people, or how we live with other people, or how we treat other people that have alcohol problems. And sometimes I've found that recovering alcoholics are the most rigid people in the world about other people's drinking problems. I found, and this is kind of a personal statement, I've never needed to go to Al-Anon to discover how to live with and be effective with another alcoholic, because the next 3 or 4 pages of the big book right here and the family afterwards give me all the action and all the information I need to be able to do that. If anybody ought to understand the illness of alcoholism and how how futile it is to try to make demands of other people that they not drink. It ought to be us who have resisted those same kind of demands for years before we got to the place where the magic that Harold's going to pick up on here in just a moment on page 18 begins to happen. And Harold, I'll segue from me to you on that.
Well, good afternoon, I think, for most people. So my name's Harold. I'm an alcoholic. Sobriety date's April 7th, 1987. Home group's AA on the Rocks. Meets on Wednesday night, Central Standard Time, 7 o'clock. We're in St. Louis. We're on Zoom right now. Probably will be for a while. We're at as high a rating as you can get for COVID-19 right now in Missouri, and especially in the county I'm in, Jefferson County. So I don't see, any time coming any off Zoom anytime shortly. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. We didn't do much. My wife and I were just pretty lone rangers on Thanksgiving Day. We had a small gathering with some of the kids on Saturday, which was, a good time, but it was still small and intimate. Not usually what we usually get into. So pretty separated this holiday season, which was a drag. But through technology and other resources, we were able to at least stay connected, but not like we normally would in a normal year. But I'm sure some of you have had that same experience. Right after this, I lead a group inside a treatment center, and it's on Zoom right now. And so afterwards, Debbie, who's on this call with us, Debbie M, I asked her if she'd come over and share on staying sober through the holidays with a room full of newcomers, people in treatment. So I put that information in the Zoom call, so if anybody wants to grab an extra meeting or support Debbie, in that meeting, you're welcome to come. I just want you to know you're welcome to attend that. And that'll be at 2 o'clock, about a half hour when we're done here. But again, I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. And if you're struggling through the holidays, I hope you let us know that, or let somebody on here know that, so we can support you in any way we can through what can be a challenging time for a lot of people. It was, getting sober in the holidays is always an interesting thing. And my first year getting sober during the holidays, I was on, like I told you a lot, I was on step none for the first 3 years. It was heavy in fellowship, 0 on the application of the 12 steps. But I was shaking and jiving. You'd see me a lot of places, and I was doing a lot of things. And of course, change was hard for me. Like, that's hard for all of us, but change was extremely hard for me when I got here. I resisted it in every which way, even physically, how I dressed and everything. And I was, I'm a country boy by heart, so I dressed pretty country most of the time, even still today, except when I have to fly a flag, or, a tie was what I call flying a flag or whatever. But I remember my first Christmas sober in 1987, and I used to hang out at this clubhouse called Hampton Facility, which is still in St. Louis on Hampton and Marquette. It's a green-sided house, so they call it the greenhouse. And that's where I started my journey. So I was a facility cripple. I lived in the facility and went to a lot of, not 3 legacy meetings, a lot of 1 legacy meetings, if that. But I went. And it's always fun to hang out at clubhouses because it's got a lot of parallels with hanging out at the bar, because there's a lot of characters inside the facilities. And there's so many Johns and Franks and Mikes and Bobs that add surnames to. You have to add additional names to them to keep them separated. So there was 3 guys in particular: City Frank, Furniture Frank, Walking Frank, Big Don. These were some of the characters at that time. So this gentleman named Big Don, who was a pretty heavy-set guy, was a beer truck driver for a distributor here. He had a crazy story. He ran over one of the Clydesdales with a beer truck. He also ran into an airplane at the airport with a beer truck. That's how his job came to an end with that particular distributor. So he was the character. Then there was Furniture Frank, who sold business furniture. Then there was City Frank, who was a city inspector. Well, Big Don, City Frank, and Furniture Frank took a liking to me, when I was just a weasel in the program. I was 22 years old and as green as you could get about the program. But I had this chain-driven billfold that I wore everywhere. With any outfit, I could put on a tuxedo and come to your wedding, and I can promise you I'd have this chain-driven billfold on my side. And why I had a chain, I don't know, because I didn't have any money and I didn't have any credit cards for sure. So there was nothing to protect, but I had it and I sported it wherever I went. Well, these guys hated it. They absolutely hated that thing. They used to get me in trouble about it all the time. And so my very first Christmas, I walk into the Hampton facility, and I walk in, they're all sitting in the living room where the payphone's at. And I walk in and they said, "Sit down, young man." And I sit down and go, "What's up?" Because usually we're, cutting jokes or whatever. And they said, "We got you a Christmas present." And they look at each other and start laughing. Ha, 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 ha. And I said, "Yeah, well, what is it?" And they threw me a brown paper sack. And they opened up the brown paper sack, and there was a brand new 3-fold billfold in there. And they'd all chipped in and bought the. And Big Don reached behind his chair, and he pulled out a pair of bolt cutters. He says, "Now I want you to take out that billfold." And so I unsnapped it and I gave it to him, and he chopped it in 1,000,000 pieces. So I never had to worry about wearing that billfold ever again. But change was hard for me, including that little billfold. But that was just some of the fun I had in early sobriety, going through the holidays and trying to fit in here. So wherever you're at on your journey right now in the holidays, if you're struggling at all, man, let us know that so we can support you. Gary kicked us off. There's a solution for many people. If they crack this book, they go through the indexes of right where they're going to. They don't want to hear about the problem. They just want to know, well, how do I get out of this? How can I drink without problems? I mean, they're probably really curious about this particular chapter. And it goes, the very first paragraph, I just want to throw in a few things. It says, nearly all have recovered. And I don't know that we can make that statistic today. I mean, at least in my experience. And I'm strictly going to speak from my experience. Of 33 years and working with countless alcoholics over the course of that time, that I wouldn't say not nearly all have recovered. I would say it's probably like 10%, like 1 out of 10, really come all the way in, step all the way down, and give themselves to this design for living as a way of life and stay sober for any amount of time. And that's just been my experience. Now, I haven't never met anybody that failed to get sober that thoroughly followed our path. Met one. And any person that I've seen that's fully come all the way in, stayed sober and lived an amazing life. But from my experience, to really live out this program, you have to get to a state of where your life depends on this before I've ever seen anybody ever fully live into this thing. And so in the early days, low bottom cases, a lot more intimacy, I think, in that particular time, smaller group of people, that was probably a true statement. Nearly all are recovered out of the first 1,000 plus that came here. But I wouldn't say that's today with the expansion of AA and the infancy that people get introduced to AA. Especially if they have parents in recovery. The first time you get in a little trouble at high school with drinking, they might toss you into a program and send you to AA or counseling or whatever, and you may or may not be alcoholic. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why that number is not. I wouldn't say it's nearly today. I would say it's all for me that thoroughly follow the path, but not nearly all follow the path, unfortunately. And neither did I when I first got here. But it uses that statement, recovered, and we talked about that in the very beginning of the study in the forwards. That it's that challenge: are we recovering? Are we still recovering? Have we recovered? And we talked about that. We used the analogy of the gunshot victim, and that survives the gunshot and ultimately has some scars to show the wounds, and it can tell everybody in public that he's a recovered gunshot victim, but that doesn't make him bulletproof. And I think this statement of recovered and as an alcoholic fits right into that category. So I think if you've adopted the 12 steps and lived into those and had a transformation of your mind and your heart, and you've been the oppression of alcohol has been lifted from you, you could easily say, as far as I'm concerned, that I'm Harold, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a recovered alcoholic, and I think that's a fair statement. But as far as spiritual maturity or emotional sobriety, I'll always be a work in progress with that. I'll never have fully arrived when it comes to that. But the disposition of actively drinking and having this mental obsession and this allergy to the body and this seemingly hopeless mind and body experience dominating, we get reprieve from that. And it comes in various stages, but we get it. You can argue in the second full paragraph that needs to be updated, that we are all at. Obviously, the day is a lot more expansive. It's worldwide today. So if there was ever going to be an amendment to the literature, that might be one place you point to. But I love that sentence where it says we are people who normally would not mix, and that's the truth. I mean, just look at everybody on the Zoom call. I mean, would you drink with some of these people? I mean, really? I mean, I was a hillbilly. I mean, I was a country boy, hillbilly as you could get. So unless you really like hillbillies that are loud and obnoxious, you probably wouldn't like hanging out with me too much. And I was a rock and roller and all that crazy stuff. So I may not have floated your boat, but we've probably all been standing at the same, well, when the well run dry, we'd be looking for at the same place for the same thing. But we're just not people that usually mix, and which is beautiful, because when you really think about it, I mean, and just think about your life and where you go. I mean, you can go to a university and there's diversity. You can go a lot of places, but typically in religious circles, whatever the religion is, it's pretty their own people. There's not a lot of diversity in it. And even in a particular faith, you may have liberal this, conservative that, progressive this, that, Republican, Democrat. You got these types, and you don't mix. You just seem to gravitate towards your own people. But in this foundation of where we're at in AA, we're very diversified. And because of the traditions, because of the concepts, we leave all that worldly stuff at the door, or at least we should. And most of us have to break that, tradition a handful of times to learn the reasons why we don't. But it's a powerful place that, it's very plural, and I think if you get to experience spirituality on a pluralitic basis. I mean, you get to see people from all walks of life that you just normally wouldn't have conversations with, rub elbows with, much less spend an hour and a half together. And so that's one of the most beautiful things that exists in this AA culture that we live in, this context that we live in. And I hope none of us ever take it for granted, because I don't know anywhere else that it exists at this level. Nowhere. Because there's always going to be worldly calamities that step in and separate me from you, whether it's race, whether it's economics, whether it's religious beliefs, traditions, whatever. I mean, there's always going to be some barrier between you and me that gets in the way. I'm a Cardinal fan, you're a Giants fan, that kind of thing, Cubs fan. I mean, there's going to be something that separates us. But here we can leave all that stuff aside, and I'm just one among many. I'm just an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic, and that's a beautiful thing. As it goes on to say, but there exists among us a fellowship, friendliness, and understanding, which is indescribably wonderful. And that's what we're talking about here. And it is indescribably wonderful. How do you describe it? Because I can't think of anything else on this planet that exists that's like it. Nothing. And I've been around for a while. I mean, I got gray hairs. I've been around. I've experienced in my lifetime, but I've never experienced anything like this. And this is why I love it. I mean, I just absolutely love it for that very reason. It's why it works, because when we hang a sign and say all are welcome if you're powerless over alcohol, it truly means that. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't have some bad apples that don't do a very good job at, representing AA from time to time. We talk about bad meetings, and some people will say, I've never been to a bad AA meeting. Friends, I've been to a ton of them. I've been to a lot of bad AA meetings, and ones that I would never go back to. And I think on page 105 of Bill Sees It, the top of the page says chief responsibility. And there's a little excerpt from one of his letters, but in that letter it says, our chief responsibility to the newcomer is to deliver an adequate demonstration of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I take that really seriously wherever I go, whatever I do in AA. I did in my early years, of course, because I was just raw and ignorant and stupid and didn't know any better. But as I grew and spiritually grew up a little bit through great sponsorship, I learned that that's a serious responsibility that we carry as an individual, as a group, as a district, as an area, as AA as a whole, to deliver an adequate demonstration. And so when we say all is welcome, hopefully that's the truth. I hope that people would come to your home group and they walk in and they have the experience that they're so excited that they can't wait to come back the following week, or they can't wait to try to create that same fellowship somewhere else where they live at. That's my hope for all of us, that we have that kind of an effect on ourselves and our people, this spiritual intoxication, attractiveness rather than promotion, that really drives us together. And so I think Gary really lifted it up well. The two perils. The peril of being powerless over alcohol is not enough by itself to hold us together. Even though we identify, that identification won't keep us together. but this common solution, which is the 12 steps. And again, another miraculous segment in its own right. I mean, you just take that out of the program and just talk about the 12 steps and the freedom and the liberty that you have in those steps to become the person that God always created you to be. I think is one of the most beautiful things on the planet. And as we talked about last week, I believe, or the week before, when we hinted a little bit at step 3, and we talked about, I lifted up out of the best of Bill in the section of faith, the very first paragraph makes that statement that we turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understood God. And Bill would say that's the most important language in our entire repertoire of literature. So it leads right into this thing I'm talking about, this liberty, this freedom that we had to be whoever we are, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. And that's what I love. We don't care what you did yesterday, but you're going to do tomorrow. We don't care what your economic status is, what your gender is, what your sexuality is, what color your skin is. I mean, we don't care. Now, we will struggle with some of those things, but hopefully if you stay here and really work the steps and live into this thing long enough that you're going to deal with all that embedded phobias and racism and junk that's in you. And of course, I had to work through that. And my sponsor had me going, told me, I want you going somewhere where you don't want to end up. And for me, that started at the Skid Row mission here in St. Louis on Washington Street, the Salvation Army Harbor Light. And I went there every Thursday night and Saturday morning for 3 years. And it was that work that really helped me unpack a lot of that junk that separated me from my fellow, if you want to use that language, in the world. The racism and the phobias and all the junk that went on. I was able to start really deconstructing that and reconstructing that with something healthy and something more spiritual and godly as far as I'm concerned. But that was a process. It was just all a process. And so the steps and traditions, the concepts, all feed that agenda and that view. So it's beautiful. The tremendous fact for everyone is that we discovered a common solution. Again, there it is. A way out which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. And there's that word, action. Not intellect, not knowledge, but action. This is great news that the book carries for the sufferer of alcoholic. Well, it is. It's like Gary said, it is the good news. It is the great news. Or as the Mercy song says, it's not great news or good news, it's the best news ever. And I think for the recovering alcoholic, that's the case. It is the very for you, is that you can come to a place where you're totally accepted and come all the way in and sit down in this thing and let us love you till you learn to love yourself, as we would say. I mean, just the simplicity of that is some of the most beautiful and wonderful things that you can lift out of this entire fellowship. And it's all found right there on the very first page of this literature. So there's so much meat on the bone. I can promise you we could spend weeks just on the pages that are coming up. And so what do you talk about? Where do you go? Gary lifted up on top of page 18 an illness of this sort. And we have come to believe that an illness involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. And I can remember two analogies, two illustrations that really helped me understand this. One was from Keith Lewis and one was from Clancy. And I'll give you both of them because they really helped me in my early sobriety. But Keith used to say, it's like one time, and Keith's passed away, and so is Clancy. If you're newer and don't know those names, those are just pioneers or, what we call just really grassroots people in our fellowship, and there's lots of them. Keith used to say, when I walked in my alcoholism is kind of like this, and I'm just paraphrasing what he had said, but it's pretty close. But he'd say, my alcoholism is like this. I'd walk into a bar and say, how much does it cost for a beer? And they say, well, it costs you $2. Well, that don't sound like too big a price to pay. I'll pay it. So you pay the $2 and you enjoy the beer, you enjoy the effect, and you go on about your business. The next time you come in and say, yeah, I have another one of those beers, what's that going to cost? Well, it's going to cost you your family. Well, that don't seem like too big a price to pay. I'll pay it. And so you slide your family over and you take the drink. Next time you come in, you say, I think I'm going to have another one of those beers. What's it going to cost you? Well, it's going to cost you your career. Yeah, it don't seem like too big a price to pay. You just slide your career over and you take it. And ultimately, if you progress far enough into this illness, one day you walk in and say, hey, I'm ready for another one of those beers. What's it going to cost me? It's going to cost you your life. And ultimately, you just say, it don't sound like too big a price to pay. I'll pay it. And as simple and as insane as that sounds, if you apply it to your life, if you really suffer from this thing, you're going to identify with that. And that's exactly, that just fits my story to a T on every aspect of my life. The other analogy about this illness that really made sense for me is Clancy used to share this from time to time. He said, this illness, he said, it's like no other. And this is back in the 80s when the AIDS epidemic was still at a pretty big high here in the world. And so he used this metaphor of AIDS, but he said, if you went up to the AIDS ward of any hospital and you walked into the patient's rooms and said, hey, at 7 o'clock downstairs, we're going to have some free coffee and we're going to have a meeting. And if you come down there and you really live into this thing, you won't have AIDS anymore. You'll be able to recover from AIDS. The people would knock you down to get out the door, to go down there. He said to the cancer ward, and he shared the same thing with the cancer patients who are, terminal with cancer, and tell them the same thing. We got coffee, we got a meeting. If you come, you're going to recover from this thing. But they would get out of bed, they would lick your feet. They would lick your feet, have a chance to go down there. But you go up to the alcoholic ward, where everybody's yellow and dying from jaundice and full of delusion and alibis and excuses and victimizations. You say, if you want to come down here, we're going to have some free coffee and some and some meeting. And if you come down, you're going to be able to recover from this thing. He said most of them will just flip hurt. That's about the best you're going to get out of most of the people. And you think about that, but that's really the nature of the beast. And so when Bill says that there's no other human sickness like it, it's true because this illness is based in delusion, meaning I can't see myself for what I really am, and I can't differentiate the true from the false. And that's the dilemma of the alcoholic. And that's why most alcoholics, at least in my experience, go on to the bitter end because of that delusion, that compulsion, that obsession to be able to drink without problems, with impunity, and get away with it, to experience the euphoric experience, that apocalyptic experience we had when we first drank. Try to return to that and stay with that is the driving force that kills us. And we just can't see it for what it is, regardless how much evidence there is. We just can't see it for what it is. And unfortunately, as Gary said, until we can see it as an illness, till we can see it for what it is, there's little hope that we're ever going to recover. If I'm blaming you or blaming my childhood or blaming abused or blaming parents or lack of money, lack of resources, I grew up on this side of the tracks, parents, on down the line. I used all that stuff. I was stuck in all those things when I got here, and they all crippled me. But to see it as an illness, and like I said, I think we shared this early on in the doctor's opinion, but I do a lot of meetings in the prison system, and I do a lot of meetings in treatment centers, and especially guys, and this is a common debate, it's a common struggle, I should say, inside the idea of a newcomer, because they're wrestling with this delusion and their illusioner mind. So come on, is alcoholism really a disease? I mean, where do you catch the disease? Do you catch it at the bar? How do you catch the disease? If it is a disease, it's the only disease that's modeled and sold. So this idea that Gary was talking about, it's a moral problem, or it's from our sin nature, our fallen character, or whatever you want to go on down the road with. This is the basis for this. And if you're using any of that to make sense of alcoholism, you're never going to probably put your arms around it and accept it for what it is, and therefore you're never going to look in the right place for the solution, and you're going to probably die in the process. The reality of it is, the book never calls it a disease. The book calls it an illness. The disease was given by American Medical Association, I believe, sometime down the road, long time down the road. But the book refers to it as an illness, as a malady. It's an accurate definition of it. And it's an illness that we can recover from. I sponsor a few doctors, and they push back on the whole disease thing from time to time, just because, the way most diseases have a germ base to it. And so I don't get caught up in all that. It don't matter to me. What matters to me is, do I got it? And I know to the center of my heart, I am powerless over alcohol. I mean, they used to give you 20 questions back in '79 when I first came to AA, and you finish these 20 questions at the bottom of the page and say, if you answer one, you're probably in trouble, and you answer two, you're probably alcoholic, or something to that effect. I mean, you didn't have to answer too many in the positive to fail this test, and of course I had them all checked, yes. But when I came back in '87, I think they dwindled it down to about 12 questions maybe. But ultimately, you could ask me one question, one question only, and that would be simply this question: Harold, can you guarantee what's going to happen when you start drinking? And I'm telling you from almost day one, I could, no sir, no ma'am, I cannot guarantee what's going to happen. I could go out with Mike or David or some of the other people on this call, and we could have the time of our life, and I mean, we could have the right food, the right night, the right weather, the right girls, the right everything. And if we talk about it for the rest of life, man, what that night? Or I could go hang out with my friend Kathy in New Jersey, and we could go out for the night. And then the next thing we know, we wake up in the jail cell and from a blackout in the bailiff saying, "Do you have any idea what you two got into tonight?" No, sir. I mean, it was that extreme. I mean, there was no guarantee what was going to happen when I started drinking, much less how much I was going to drink. But it was even worse than that. It was like, it could be pretty tragic, or it could be pretty crazy fun. I mean, it was just no guarantee. But that was the illness that we get caught up in. And as it goes on, but not so with alcoholic illness. For there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. I mean, we just give them away, as using Keith Lewis's example. It engulfs all whose life it touches in the sufferer's life. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity. I mean, go on down the line. I work with a lot of new people, especially inside the treatment center. I mean, these are everyday conversations, man. My family don't want anything to do with me anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do when I leave here. I don't even know where I'm going to live. I don't have a job. I don't have a license. I can't go back to my mom's house. I mean, so when it's saying that these are the consequences of living this life over and over and over again, it is. I mean, it's like a bad Mike Tyson fight or a bad Rocky fight. It's like you fight again. You're going to get in the ring with King Alcohol again, and you're handing out free tickets to everybody. Hey, come and watch me. I'm going to fight again Saturday night. You got to come. And people are like, dude, we're not coming. We're not going to watch you get beat down anymore. We can't watch. It's too gross. It's too grotesque. It's horrific. It's heartbreaking. It's terrible. No thanks. So next thing you know, you show up at the fight and look out into there's nobody there anymore. And that's where alcoholism takes us to if we live long enough, have that experience. So it's an ugly illness. It's a bittersweet thing. We see these constant warnings and examples. This whole book is full of examples and warnings. And here's a good tip for everybody, myself included. If your story ever ends up in this book, let's hope they use it as an example and not a warning. You don't want to be Fred or Jim or some of these guys that are in the story. You want to be an example. Really, really important. But it's a bittersweet thing. It's like if you live this thing out, you're going to have the most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. If you don't, and you're truly alcoholic, you're a dead person walking. So I mean, it's that cut and dry. So it's extreme this way, and it's extreme this way, and there's just not a lot of things I can think of like it. Goes on to say, we hope this time will inform and comfort those who may have been affected. There are many. That's an understatement. Highly competent psychiatrists who have dealt with us have found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss the situation without reserve. Strangely enough, wives, parents, and intimate friends usually find us more unapproachable than do a psychiatrist and a doctor. And it's still true today. And I'm just being transparent. Gary said he was having people trying to fix him since he was 4 feet tall. I got 4 daughters and a bride. I mean, people are always trying to fix me. Still today, I mean, there's people trying to fix me all the time because I'm pretty flawed. As Alan Jackson was saying, I'm definitely a work in progress, no questions. But still, that same mindset. My wife came to me yesterday and says, "I want to share something with you, but I don't want you to get mad." That's how the conversation starts. And I don't know how you respond, but I'm immediately defensive. I mean, I'm just immediately on the defense. I have no idea, clueless to what she's going to even bring up. But whatever it is, it's all me and probably the bad guy. So I'm immediately on the defensive. Just exactly what they're talking about. It's impossible to talk to this person. Strangely enough, wives and intimate friends usually find us even more unapproachable. And I'm just being transparent with you. My wife tells me that sometimes still today. You're tough, Harold, to talk to sometimes, when it comes down to certain things. So that nature is still very much a part of me. It can be still today, that unapproachable, that defensive, that almost delusional thinking. I want to look at anything. I just wanted to be on my terms. That extreme self-centeredness still rears itself in my life still today, 33 years later. So I just want to be clear on that. But you can see why that's why when you sit there and you read this stuff, then you think back to Silkworth. and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands. I mean, I think Wikipedia say close to 40,000 people Dr. Silkworth worked with, alcoholics, long before he had this experience with Bill and this whole spiritual experience in 12 steps. You can imagine that's why he's probably bald, because he probably rubbed every hair, off his head trying to work with alcoholics. I mean, just think about it. Because you never tell you, how much do you drink? I mean, there's a great question for an alcoholic. How much do you drink? What's the answer? Oh, a couple, 6-pack. We lie. As my sponsor, Roy, told me in the early days of sobriety, Harold, there's 3 things I can tell you about an alcoholic. You want to know what they are? 1, they lie. 2, they lie. And 3, they lie about lying. That's what I can tell you about an alcoholic.